What Push didn't tell you was I was also a guinea pig for Startupify Your HR. And the first time he mentioned the name to me, I kind of responded by saying, "What? Stupefy HR?" Because it didn't roll off my tongue very easily either. So if you'll allow me, I just want to introduce myself just for a moment. So my name is Rukhsana Pervez. I've spent probably the best part of my career, 18 plus years, actually doing roles like many of you. So I worked for a Fortune 5 company and did everything from business partnering to working in COEs to internal leadership to organization development, and my heart remains there. But I joined Deloitte about 18 months ago, and it was a huge shift for me. But actually what it's allowed me to do is reinvent myself. So when you think about that continuum of doesn't get it, fears it, can do it, I kind of went through doesn't get it and fears it in about 5 seconds. There was not a lot of time in between. And I came with a narrative that I want to share with you. I've probably been on the menu for lunch many times. Starting in HR, I've been through that transition of, trying to get a seat at the table. And it was painful at times. And I think kind of what we're learning and what we are discovering through Startupify Your HR it should allow us to feel a little bit less like lunch and a little bit more like dessert in HR. Leaving a sweet taste in the client's mouth, leaving a sweet taste in the leader's mouth, right? Because they feel like we're actually making traction quickly. And that's what we want to talk about today. I came with a narrative, and the narrative in my head was always around it can't be done here. We have a super strong culture, and it's one of our competitive advantages. So why would we change that? The second thing that used to go on in my head quite a lot was it has to be perfect, right? I cannot take something to my leader unless it's perfect, because I'm always coming from a perspective of, or a place where HR has had to fight for credibility. So why would I take something that is not perfect, right? And then the last thing that kind of tended to go through my head quite a lot is things take time. Culture takes time. Mindset shift takes time. So you can imagine what happened when I met Indro, right? So I'm sitting there and I'm like, yeah, mindset shift takes time. He's like, it's all in your head, right? And then I'm sitting there going, yeah, but the cultures in organizations are so strong. And he says it's all in your head, right? And you know how the last bit goes, right? It's all in your head. So it kind of forced me, I think, to kind of move through that continuum of feeling like I didn't get it for a while, this whole digital thing, to moving through fear very quickly by just immersing myself in it. And coming to a place where I actually think that today I can stand here and share something with you that I feel really proud of, and that I really think can change the way that HR functions are working. So this is a story that I want to tell you today. So I hope you'll indulge me for just a little while. Oh, I should go forward, not backwards. That would help. All right, so Startupify Your HR. What is this all about? So, Jeff earlier talked about the trends, right? Am I standing in front of the slide? Sorry, okay. So Jeff earlier talked about the trends. And what we believe is that you cannot really take or attack any of these trends in isolation. What we need to be thinking about is the integration of these trends. And what that results in is wicked problems for HR to solve, right? Truly complex, wicked problems. And that's what keeps us in the HR profession, right? Having those wicked problems to solve. So as we think about what these wicked problems are, we also understand that there is a burning platform for HR and that the role that HR is playing is changing. I don't know if any of you have been on LinkedIn recently, but the titles of professions are changing so dramatically, right? We see things like organization engineer, or architect, right? We see things like ecosystem curator. Right? What's an ecosystem curator, right? We see things like digital pioneers, right? All of this creates curiosity. But we have been, as HR, I think, in a space, as we heard this morning, of being a trusted advisor for a long time. And whilst that still remains important, I think it's time for us to take a step further than that, right? And move a little bit more towards that digital evangelist. And maybe rethink the way that we're working. Okay? So that's what I want to talk a little bit about today. So here are the shifts. So, Pushp and I, as he mentioned, about 18 months ago, we kind of went back to the drawing board. That's when I was the guinea pig and I just joined. And we started to think about, gosh, what would it look like if an HR function started to learn from the way that startups think? What are some of the shifts that we would have to make, right, to be different? What are some of the shifts that we would have to make to bring impact rapidly? And these are some of the things that we came up with. And I had a hard time with these initially because this has been my bread and butter forever. So you're actually asking me to give up quite a lot, right? So if you take a look on kind of the left-hand side, I'm sure some of you will still be experiencing some of this, right? But on the right-hand side, what we're talking about is how about if we gave up focusing on programs and policies and we put all of our effort focused on employees and end-user design? Right? How about if we moved from thinking about external best practices and instead just started to focus on a few game-changing practices rather than many? Right? How about if we moved from siloed functions to more of a seamless experience for the employee, regardless of where that comes from? And in many cases, if you talk to your employee, their experience does not start and end in HR. Right? So why do we feel like we're the custodians of the HR experience? We touch them at points in their journey, but we don't own that journey for them, right? So just some of the shifts that we kind of felt were going to be important as we move forward. So where did that take us? That took us to learning some lessons from startups, right? We know that startups have been successful and they've been able to, in many cases, scale very, very fast and create so much buzz and excitement. Right? So we decided to take a look and say, well, what are some of the things that they're doing that have been successful that we might be able to try in the HR function? And this is what we came up with. We felt like, actually, we can be agile, right? We don't have to be perceived to be the slowest function in the organization. We can apply a lot of design thinking principles by starting with the employee first. And we'll talk a bit about how we do that. We can leverage from this notion of know your customer, which marketing organizations and sales organizations have been doing for years. But if we apply the same level of discipline to understanding our employees and the same depth, using something like a persona technique, right, then we could have the same level of confidence in what our employees want as marketing organizations have with their customers. And then what about if we actually decided to break some things? How much fun would that be? Right? So we talked about what are some of the things that we hold in our minds that potentially if we broke, nobody would even notice. Right? And I'm sure you all have policies or processes or things that you have in your function that you steward that you probably feel like not many people pay attention to, but we do it because we feel like we have to or because it's been there for a long time. And then finally, we started to train ourselves or teach ourselves how to rapid prototype. Now, rapid prototyping is not something you typically associate with a service function or an enabling function, right? It's not something we think about. We think about it in terms of products, right? We think about organizations that do product prototyping, but you can prototype anything on a piece of paper using a pencil, right? We can prototype policies, we can prototype experiences, we can prototype new programs. It doesn't take much. So we actually took all of this learning and then we said, okay, let's find some other guinea pigs, right? Let's find some other folks that we could try this on. And actually, this is how Startupify HR really started. We had a couple of organizations that came to us who, were feeling like they wanted to build an agile HR function. We had another organization that said to us, you know what, our strategy has been the same for such a long time, and we're feeling like with all this future of work stuff and all these new trends, we really need to change our strategy. Can we engage you to help us redo our strategy? And to both of those who had initially come to us and were thinking about, you know, a 3 or 4 month project, we said, what if we could just spend a couple of days with you and see how far we can get, right? Don't engage us for 3 months. Don't engage us for 4, 5, 6 months. Let us actually just bring some new techniques to your function, and let's try it together and see if it works. So we did 2 things. We actually did some work with a oil and gas company in Malaysia to revamp their global talent strategy. And we did some work ahead of time. And we then spent 2 days together with them. The outcome of that is that they have a new blueprint, and they did it in 2 days. And that blueprint kind of tells them what the big initiatives are that they're going to take forward. And it also talks to them about how they want to work differently. So it's both concrete and aspirational at the same time, and it didn't take forever. Now, obviously, there's a bit that goes before and a bit that goes afterwards, right? But what I'm proposing to you is that actually we can work pretty rapidly if we leverage some of these techniques. So we've tried it in many different industries already now, and what we're finding is that HR functions are enjoying it, number one, and they're getting results, and they're feeling like it's so simple they can do it themselves, which is actually the goal, right? These techniques are so simple that you don't need to engage anyone to do them. Now, I know I'm putting myself out of a job here, but honestly, that's what we're hearing from them. They're saying, look, it's simple. We like the shifts. We feel digital. We feel agile. And we feel like if we just practice this, we can probably do this ourselves with our teams, with other functions, with our clients, with our leaders. So what does it look like? So this is kind of the journey that we've been kind of testing, right? So we do some rapid discovery at the front end. I mean, we can't go into this blind. That would be stupid, right? So we spend some time up front understanding kind of what's going on in your organization so far. But actually, we spend more time talking to the leaders and the employees and less time talking to the HR function. Right, so our entire focus and our balance is shifted towards the leaders and the employees. And you can do that in many different ways, all the ways that you know, right? Focus groups, one-on-one conversations, but we do it pretty quickly. And it's because our premise is that we actually only need to speak to a few to get a relatively good sample. We don't have to spend, a whole month interviewing and running surveys, because we honestly believe that we can get the right data set in just a random sampling, a small sampling, and it's usually good enough. So we do a rapid kind of discovery, and then the key to all of this is this lab, and I'm going to kind of double click on this in a minute, but we spend basically 2 to 3 days with an HR function, right? And in that 2 to 3 days is really where the magic happens, and we'll talk about the magic in just a few minutes. Now, where things really start to hit the road is actually after the lab. Right? After the lab is where the functions go on their sprints. And during those sprints, what's happening is that they're taking initiatives that they have conceived in the lab, and they're actually taking them out, they're prototyping them, they're taking them to the user, they're testing them, they're not waiting for it to be perfect. They're taking it to the leaders, they're taking it to the employees, they're testing it, then they're iterating and they're coming up with their next prototype. And through this entire process, what they're garnering and what they're getting is actually engagement, right? And they're reducing the amount of time that they're going to have to spend on things like, how do I get somebody to buy into this new process? Because throughout the entire process, they are engaging because they're not waiting for it to be perfect. And then the last thing that we do is we kind of bring people back together more for a bit of a booster shot, right? To kind of see how the experiments are going and to make sure that they know what the next step on the journey is. And what we found is just an example of some of the types of experiments that have come out of this. One organization is doing what they call the Uberization of talent. Right? And this is the open talent economy. Raquel and I were talking about this earlier, right? But they're not in that space at all. They still live in a world where their talent is all full-time hot bodies, right? So this is a massive thing for them. So before they go kind of to the outside ecosystem, they first want to figure out if they can create an internal ecosystem where you can essentially buy and sell talent internally. So for them, they called it the Uberization of talent. Another organization that we worked with, and I think Indra is going to talk about this a little bit later, but their whole thing was, how do we create purpose and meaning for millennials? And they came up with something they called the Amoeba Project. And what the Amoeba Project is that on a cycle, they would have 40 to 50 millennials come together and literally do a hackathon. And through that, they would end up with 30 to 40 ideas, right, that these millennials had come up with that were relevant to either the organization's growth or the country's growth. So they said for country and for company. And what's happening right now is from that process, there are a number of these initiatives that have already been invested in by the company. And the cycle is on its 5th round. And they keep getting more and more millennials who are signing up for this program. And what the business is saying is, we can't believe that came out of HR. Whose big idea was that really? Right? So for them, it was something that they partnered with the business on, with the digital organization on internally. And they came up with something that for them was about millennial purpose, but for the rest of the organization has ended up with investable ideas. Okay? So let's just double click on the lab just for a second. So what happens in the lab is really bringing together a whole bunch of startup techniques. Right, so we do things like we get them to think about experiments. So what are some of the initiatives or the big problems that you want to solve? We do things like hackathons, which I'm sure you're all very familiar with now. But essentially, taking a problem and trying to solve it in a very, very short space of time. We focus on personas, so we deep dive and we take a look at how a must-win talent persona is thinking, feeling, what are they doing, and we get quite up close and personal. So what we've done a few times is we've actually let the HR organization come up with these personas, and then we brought these personas in and let them take a look. And it's quite interesting, the difference in opinion, right, that we have of our employees and what they bring themselves. Obviously, we spend time on the digital mindset. We also spend time on rapid prototyping ideas. And then finally, we've actually found that what's really, really helpful is to use the business model canvas and use that in an HR context to kind of help garner all of this and pull it all together in one place. So essentially, what happens is real people come with real problems and come up with real solutions. So the thing about doing something like this is I think what it does is it stops us from working behind closed doors, right? This is that kind of open the door and enter the apartment that Indra was talking about earlier. So, there's a minimum requirement, right, for these types of things. And in our mind, this is not just about bringing the HR function together. If we're going to do it alone, we may as well not do it. Right. So when you do something like this, our view is to do exactly what startups do, which is bring others in all the time at every point in the journey. So in any given lab, there will be employees coming in and out, taking a look at what's going on, providing some input, sharing their ideas, disagreeing if they don't feel it's the right kind of path that we're on. There are leaders coming in. We've had customer experience folks coming in. We look for pockets of excellence within the organization and bring those folks in. So on the kind of what do you bring side, there's really you, your leaders, your employees, your alumni, your target employees. So depending on the problems to solve, you open up the doors, right? And then on the other side, what we do is, I think the key thing from a Deloitte perspective is that HR doesn't solve its own problems. So we have I think quite a strong view that if it's an HR problem, it should be solved by not just human capital, but by strategy, but by digital, but by innovation, but by all of the different types of capabilities that we have. And what does that result in? That results, in our view, in very, very employee-centric, solutions that are easy for us to then take to the business and not even have to sell. So one of the things that we talked about in one of our labs was the client kind of said to me, he said, Rukhsana, he said the easiest thing, and he's kind of, I'll just share with you, he's kind of almost at the end of his career, right? Probably has another 3 years to go. And he said to me, he said, Rukhsana, you know, the easiest thing I've had to learn, right, and I'm about to retire, is how to use my iPhone, right? We had Jeff told us this earlier. The easiest thing I've had to learn how to use is my iPhone. And he said, you know what my dream is? My dream is that my company's succession planning process is as easy to use as an iPhone. Or my compensation policy is as intuitive as an iPhone, right? Or that my onboarding process is as intuitive as an iPhone, right? And that's kind of where we kind of doubled down and we said, you know what if we start everything with the user? What if we start everything that we design and orchestrate with the user? Will we get a little bit closer to that dream? And I think Startupify HR is getting us there. It's getting us to a point where we find that HR can be fast, it can be agile, it can innovate. It kind of shattered all of my long-held beliefs, and that still feels uncomfortable sometimes. These guys know that I'm usually the one that's always worrying, going, are you sure? Are you sure? Should we really do this? You know, it also creates, I find, a lot of traction and energy within the HR function because it kind of empowers the function to believe that they can do it. And it also connects you with the business from the get-go. You're not waiting until you've designed something that's perfect before you take it to them, which in my mind typically takes 3 to 6 months before you feel ready enough. And I just don't think the business will wait for us anymore, right? Experimentation, rapid prototyping, this stuff can apply to HR programs. We can do it. You can use it. It's not just the privy of, you know, product organizations, right? This stuff can be done on anything. And then I think one of the growing skills for HR is around design thinking. We probably don't have a lot of this skill within HR right now. And we may not even need to have it in HR. The key thing is that we need to have access to these skills, right? Wherever they are in the ecosystem, we need to have access to them. We probably cannot move forward as a function without having access to some of these skills. If we're working in organizations that are going digital or organizations that are on a digital transformation, we'll get left behind if we don't have some of this stuff. And then 10x thinking is the key. So this is the notion that kind of, you know, Indo talks a lot about, which is it's all in our heads. We've got to get behind our limitations and our constraints and start to think about what is really possible. Now, what we found, and I'll just kind of end with this, is what we found is that the best ideas that are coming out of Startupify HR have come from employees. The best ideas. Because they're unconstrained. They're not worried about their careers, right? They know that they're in it for the next, you know, maybe 2 to 3 years and not for the next 15 to 20. And they're keen to add purpose and meaning. So the best ideas that have come out of this have been generated by the employees. And HR has sometimes struggled to accept that actually it wasn't their idea. Right, and we've all been there, and I have been there too. So my ask of all of you is to think broadly and to kind of look out in the ecosystem and test some of these techniques out. You don't need us to do that, right? It's there, it's open sourced, it's all available, and it's all possible. So I think I'm gonna stop there. Oh yes, I have a question too. So the question on Slido, if you could all go back to Slido, is what next-gen capabilities will you need in HR going forward? What next-gen capabilities will you need? And you can just type in your response. Okay?
This is free text.
Free text, yep. Free text. Cloud.
10 more seconds.
I'm impatient.
Yeah. You want to know more?
Oh. Wow, look at that. So we just all need to think a bit more. Still got people typing in, yeah? Just a couple more things coming in. Yeah. So if you take a look at kind of our human capital trends, I mean, what you're seeing here is very much kind of what we have found out from kind of all of the organizations that we've surveyed. Design thinking, agile, understanding how to bring agile principles to the work that we do, learning from startups, data, analytics, all hugely critical going forward. And many of them just not kind of innate HR skills, right? So this is where the challenge is for us, is as we continue to spend our entire lives helping the business, I think it's time for HR to kind of spend a little bit of time helping ourselves and figuring out how we're going to solve kind of the issue around the capabilities that we need in the organization, and how we're going to leverage the ecosystem for them. Because the folks that have these types of skills probably don't want to join a large corporate multinational either, right? They probably want to come and do the work that they're interested in, and then go find the next best opportunity, right? So it's an interesting challenge for us to take on. Now, I want to just qualify that Startupify Your HR is not your be-all and end-all. You clearly need to do some other base business things, right? So, your payroll still needs to run, right? You still need to have a series of policies. You still got to have good data, right? But that's all the platform that allows you to start executing and creating something like Startupify Your HR in your organization. So with that, I think I'm going to close and hand back over to Push. Thank you very much for your time and your indulgence. Thank you.